It's 2:30 p.m. in the quiet community of Lacombe, Louisiana, when a chilling 911 call is placed reporting that Nanette Krentel's home was engulfed in flames. Her body is later found in the rubble, burned beyond recognition. An intense investigation unfolded, involving local police, fire departments, the coroner's office, and eventually even the FBI. And what they uncovered was completely unexpected. A tangled web of evidence that just created more questions than answers. A mysterious phone call placed just an hour before the fire, an unidentified figure lurking on the security footage, and emails from Nanette showing that she was terrified of something or someone. This case is riddled with puzzles, but there's one thing we do know. The fire was deliberate, and crucial evidence was targeted in an effort to conceal the identity of the person responsible. With all of that in mind, I'm in Lacombe, Louisiana, to investigate the death of Nanette Krentel. Lacombe, Louisiana, where Nanette and her husband Steve lived, is a charming community nestled in St. Tammany Parish on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain, about 40 miles north of New Orleans. It's a beautiful area, and the rich history, nature, waterways, and small communities reminded me a bit of the low country of South Carolina, where I'm from. Lacombe, Louisiana is unincorporated, meaning it's not a city or a town, but a community. There's a stretch of road with some businesses on it, but there's no downtown or anything like that. Nanette, a former preschool teacher, and Steve, the fire chief of St. Tammany Parish's Fire District 12, had been married for 22 years at the time of Nanette's death.
Absolutely loved it, loved being with the kids, and was one of the most sought-after teachers in this area.
Nanette had a giving heart and would frequently make pies and brownies to bring to the firemen at the fire station. Those who knew Nanette knew that she loved animals. She had a Chihuahua named Harley and two cats, Baby Kitty and Smokey. Her and Steve owned 100 acres at the end of a sparsely populated road. Life seems like it would be easygoing and peaceful here in Lacombe, Louisiana, but Nanette apparently felt differently. For reasons we'll get into later, she felt unsafe, and her husband took serious steps to ensure that no one could get to Nanette to harm her. There were 9 cameras installed on the property, 2 at the gate so Nanette could see who was at the gate from the safety of her home before letting anyone in, and 6 cameras at the house. There were extra storm doors installed on the exterior doors of the home, and the back door even had a security board that could be set in place across the doorway for extra reinforcement. These home fortifications weren't the only ways Nanette and Steve prepared for potential danger. Over the years, they purchased and became proficient with over 30 firearms, one of which, a .40 caliber Springfield handgun, Nanette would carry with her everywhere.
She didn't go anywhere without at least one gun with her.
According to her husband Steve, the morning of July 14th, 2017 started like most days for the couple.
Every morning, whenever I was leaving to go somewhere, she walked me out. And it was no different that day.
She then drove to McDonald's for breakfast. Police have unreleased footage from the nearby Walgreens of Nanette in her car in the drive-thru with her dog Harley. Shortly after this, a neighbor's security camera on the road that Nanette lived at the end of captured Nanette's car returning home. Later that morning, she placed a call to the local pharmacy to get a prescription filled. At 1:30 p.m., she places a call from her cell phone. The recipient claims they don't know Nanette or Steve and believe this call to be a misdial. This was the last contact she attempted to make with anyone outside of her home. An hour later, at 2:30 p.m., a neighbor's kid riding her bike in the area noticed the smoke and flames and called 911. A camera in the fire department's vehicle captured the fire chief pulling up to his own home as it was burning to the ground. When he was first informed of the fire, he had tried calling his wife multiple times, but had 0 success. And when he saw her car in flames in the garage, he feared the worst.
The garage doors fell in, and that's when I knew that her car was here. My personal truck was here, and I had just walked off over there and just laid on the ground from there.
There were a few extremely difficult hours where the family knew Nanette was likely inside, but were still holding on to hope that maybe she had gone for a walk, that maybe she was picked up by a friend, that maybe she was spared. But this wasn't the case, and Nanette's body was found face up in the master bathroom of the home. She was burned beyond recognition. It's relatively rare for someone to die in a house fire during the day. If a fire starts at night, it's possible for it to be too late to escape by the time the residents wake up. But during the day, when you're awake, it's pretty easy to see or smell the fire shortly after it started, giving you enough time to escape. So why was Nanette caught in this fire? It was initially speculated that she died trying to save her animals. Maybe she did escape the fire, but went back inside thinking she had enough time to search for her dog and cats. But she misjudged how much time she really had and ended up trapped in the flames with no way to escape. While these were the initial thoughts, it pretty quickly became apparent that there was much more to this story. The fire department determined that the fire was intentionally set, with accelerant poured in two places. The first was the DVR, or box that kept the recordings from the security cameras. Someone didn't want this to survive the fire. The second was near the window in the master bedroom. There were also guns found in the home, inside and outside of the gun safe, and it couldn't be immediately determined if all of these belonged to the Crintles. Digital evidence always plays a big role in these investigations, and there's tons of digital information out there online about pretty much everyone. Trust me, I know this fact better than most because oftentimes I'm the one scouring the internet to try to find information on people. I want to thank Aura for sponsoring this video. I remember using these resources that I developed to look into myself and see what was out there. I was shocked at just how much personal information there was about me online. Addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, information on people I was related to or close to. There was even an email address listed for a girl I dated in high school, and I'm currently 34 years old. All of this information is available to companies called data brokers who use your personal information as their product and sell it to robocallers, telemarketers, spammers, and anyone else that wants to learn more about you. Aura will identify these data brokers that are exposing your information and automatically submit opt-out requests on your behalf. They'll even opt you out of junk mail and telemarketing lists. I don't know if you saw this, but AT&T revealed that over 73 million customer records were released on the dark web. They recommend that those affected use strong passwords, monitor account activity, and consider credit freezes or fraud alerts from credit bureaus. Aura does all of this for me, and I don't have to download several different apps just because a company couldn't keep my data secure. If my info was compromised in this AT&T breach, I don't really have to worry because Aura is always on, always doing the hard work of keeping me safe online. I value my privacy and I value yours too. You can use my link aura.com/Eric Allen to try 2 weeks completely free and see how many data brokers are sharing your information. The link is in the description below. Again, that's aura.com/Eric Allen to start protecting your information online. Back to the video. Okay, now that we've established the baseline evidence, who are the people that could be responsible for this? According to the CDC, roughly half of female murder victims are killed by an intimate partner.
Of course, the chief, Stephen, was our first person of interest.
Steve and Nanette met 22 years before the fire, while Steve was still married to his first wife. Steve ultimately left his first wife for Nanette. This type of situation is always interesting to me, choosing to be with someone who is cheating on their significant other with you, as you're essentially choosing a partner who you know is a cheater. Who's to say they won't cheat on you down the line? Anyways, this is exactly what happened. About 2 years before the fire, Steve had an affair with a coworker of his at the fire department, and Nanette found out.
The affairs I admitted to when this happened, when it came into question.
And shortly after the fire, Steve is officially declared a suspect by the St. Tammany Sheriff's Office. You might be thinking, okay, well, it seems like the case kind of solves itself. Her husband, the fire chief, killed her and set the house on fire. But we've only scratched the surface of the complex web of details and evidence that this story contains. It was 2011 when Steve got a call from his brother Brian. He was drunk. He had been driving his mother's truck while intoxicated and driven into a ditch. Brian had a pretty long rap sheet already, and if the police caught him driving under the influence again, it would mean big trouble, jail time. Hoping to find a way out of the situation, he calls his brother Steve. Steve and Nanette do drive out to the scene of the accident, but the police show up as well.
He was drinking, and the police wound up arresting him that evening. He went to jail for about a year. Nanette did go with me when we went to the scene that night, and he felt that we bared some responsibility for that, and he had a hard time forgiving us for that.
In March of 2011, Nanette sent these emails to her family regarding Brian. When he says, "I will start your house on fire and kill you when you come out," that's a serious threat to me. He threatened to set the house on fire, rape me, and kill us. Brian is capable of anything, and someone that has nothing to lose, is full of hate, uses drugs, makes threats, is a loose cannon. This situation is what caused Nanette to get serious about security, and it was around this time in 2011 that they got the security cameras and started getting serious about becoming proficient with firearms.
She had one gun in her purse, one gun, a different gun in her car, another gun in the house, plus she had a Remington 20-gauge home defense shotgun. And I know there was an AR-15 because she said, "This is my baby."
Steve told Eyewitness News, quote, "After discussing her fears many times, we addressed all concerns to the best of our abilities. That is why she was comfortable at home." While the situation with Brian had happened years before the fire, people around Nanette claimed she was still scared of Brian and what he could do.
We had many conversations via emails talking about Brian and how scared she was of him. He would threaten her because I think he felt that she was kind of sticking her nose in his family business where it didn't belong.
Nanette's sister recalls a conversation she had with her, saying this about her husband Steve, quote, "If he doesn't try protecting me from Brian and his family, that I'm kicking him out." And these fears of Brian persisted up until Nanette's death. At the end of June, just 17 days before the fire, Nanette sends an ominous email to her father. Included in this email was a photo of a man walking towards Nanette as she was at the end of her driveway, getting the mail. "This was the day I got out to get the mail and looked up, and this man was walking towards me. He just looks creepy." Remember, Nanette's house was at the end of a rural road. What would somebody be doing down there? Nanette also told her father that she had found a knife and cigarette butt on her property, saying, "Someone has come onto the property," and also told her father that she felt she was being followed.
She said she was being followed. She also said that she had found a knife and cigarette butt on the property, and she said somebody has come onto the property.
So what came of the investigation? Well, after the fire subsided, the police roped off the scene and Nanette's body was removed.
They made a wall of people standing shoulder to shoulder so that I couldn't see them move her.
Once Nanette's body is removed, the huge task of sifting through the rubble begins. Again, this fire didn't occur at night when Nanette would be sleeping and might not notice the fire until it was too late. So there had to be some other reason she wouldn't have noticed the fire early on and just walked out of the house. It's initially speculated that she died because she went back into the house attempting to save her animals. Maybe they were scared and hiding. Maybe Nanette underestimated how much time she had to search, and by the time she decided to leave the pets behind, it was too late. But this theory was quickly proven false when the coroner found that Nanette hadn't died from the fire at all, but from a gunshot wound to the head. This changes everything. Before I move on, I want to say it's easy to put the police under a microscope and criticize every little thing we think they should have done differently. And I've seen time and time again people who don't know the whole story or anything about what makes for a good investigation bash police for decisions they make. Because of this, I normally stay away from making too many judgments, unless it's pretty cut and dry that the police messed up. In my opinion, this is one of those times the police clearly dropped the ball. We don't know everything that they collected when they searched the rubble, but we do know of a few things that they did collect, and more importantly, a few things that they didn't. They find 2 firearms near Nanette. Some sources I read claim at this point the police believed it was likely Nanette killed herself, and that this was the reason why, the very next day after the fire, the police are already concluding their search and release the scene. They did not collect the DVR that the cameras would have recorded to, and as you'll find out shortly, they missed one more key piece of evidence. Okay, so at this point in the investigation, it seems that Nanette is the prime suspect in her own death. Let's consider this for a moment before we move on. Towards the end of Nanette's life, those close to her did feel she was becoming more distant.
She seemed like withdrawn. She did seem a little sad and melancholy and withdrawn in her later years.
But the evidence found early in the investigation can be applied to more than just Nanette. Steve obviously had access to the firearms in the house, and he would have knowledge of the camera system. And as the fire chief, he would have knowledge on how to effectively and efficiently burn the house down. And what about Brian, Nanette's brother-in-law? Well, according to messages from Nanette, he literally threatened her life and threatened setting her home on fire. And we have no idea who this mystery man is or his motives for being down at their gate. At this point in the investigation, there's enough evidence to speculate, but not near enough to come to any conclusions. Nobody can be ruled out. But it wouldn't be long before a few more discoveries would lead the coroner's office to make an official ruling on Nanette's manner of death.
Today we officially released the cause and manner of death in the Nanette Printel investigation. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head, and the manner of death was a homicide. The most compelling fact in making that decision was there was no evidence of particulate matter or soot anywhere in her airway, including on microscopic examination. I am aware that the sheriff's office may have a different interpretation of the fact, but we feel that the evidence strongly supports the notion that she was dead before the fire started.
Essentially, the coroner is saying that it couldn't have been a suicide. We already knew that someone intentionally set the house on fire, and now we know it couldn't have been Nanette because she was dead before the fire started. Additionally, neither of the two guns recovered near Nanette matched the caliber of gun used to kill her. Upon this revelation, the St. Tammany Sheriff's Office goes back out to the scene to rope it off again. This search is much more thorough as they hunt for additional evidence. In this side-by-side comparison, you can see what the house looked like after the first search and after the second. This second photo is what the area should have looked like the first time the scene was released, and this is why I criticized the police for what I would call a less than thorough investigation. But at this point, it does seem the sheriff's office begins to take things seriously. Since this phase 2 of the investigation has started, the sheriff's office claims they have executed over 65 search warrants, conducted over 80 interviews, and reviewed 45 hours of surveillance footage from multiple locations. In addition, they claim they have asked for assistance specifically for the investigation of Nanette's death from the FBI, ATF, United States Postal Inspection Service, the St. Tammany Parish District Attorney's Office, the Louisiana Office of State Fire Marshal, the St. Tammany Parish Coroner's Office, and the Louisiana State Police Special Investigation Unit and Technical Support Unit. Okay, so according to the coroner, Nanette did not kill herself. So who did? Could Steve or Brian or this mystery person at the end of her road have set all of this up to look like a suicide? Maybe they killed Nanette, strategically placed those firearms near her to be found during the investigation, doused the DVR and master bedroom window with accelerant, started the fire, and left. After the fire, Steve was extremely cooperative, even asking for, taking, and passing a polygraph.
I was never offended or upset when the police were investigating me and looking at everything. That, to me, made perfect sense. Statistically, I would be the individual that needed to be the primary focus, and I cooperated with everything.
Additionally, the house wasn't the only place Steve had installed cameras, and the 2 other locations he installed them played a key role in clearing Steve and another suspect. Steve had also installed cameras at the fire station, and investigators were able to see that he was here throughout the day.
Several people at the fire station accounted for him throughout the day. Went and met some people at lunch at Outback, and his phone was slotted back to the fire station where he was there until he got the call about his house on fire.
In September of 2017, it was announced that Steve was officially cleared as a suspect.
Our initial primary person of interest in this investigation, the victim's husband, has been cleared. Stephen Crintel has been fully cooperative with this investigation from the beginning.
We also know that Steve hired a private investigator to investigate Nanette's death, but he hasn't made those findings public. And Steve did do some digging on his own. He recorded a conversation with Brian's probation officer. Brian was wearing an ankle monitor, and Nanette was under the impression that if it went within 1,000 feet of Nanette's home, his probation officer would be notified. In a conversation with this parole officer after the fire, Steve found out this was not the case. The monitor was only monitoring alcohol, and the GPS function was not enabled.
He was a second person of interest, so we had to go back and follow up in our investigation to see where his whereabouts were. Then his alibi checked out, and he's still a person of interest, but not at this time.
Steve also had installed cameras at his mother's house, where his brother Brian was staying. Not only did Brian not have a car, but these cameras captured Brian at the home that day. the timestamp on the cameras show that he couldn't have been the one that set the fire. Additionally, Brian agreed to a polygraph when asked by the police and passed. So it seems as if neither Steve nor Brian could have killed Nanette themselves, but that doesn't mean they aren't responsible. Could the mystery man have done the job for them? And while it may seem unlikely that this complex murder-for-hire scheme was executed flawlessly, and that's the answer to this mystery of Nanette's death, we don't really have alternatives to this theory, right? Well, I actually think we do, but it does get a little difficult to talk about. When the police went out to rope off the scene again and do another search, they do find another gun at the scene near Nanette.
We did locate a gun that we believe could have been used to kill Nanette. That gun was sent off for ballistics testing, and unfortunately, due to the hot temperatures of this fire, we weren't able to pinpoint whether the ballistics matched the bullet that was discovered within her head. There's a strong possibility that that was the gun that killed Nanette.
This was the gun that Nanette carried with her everywhere, the .40 caliber Springfield, and police would later reveal that Nanette was killed with a .40 caliber round. Additionally, Nanette was right-handed, and her gunshot wound was in her right temple, the most common place for a right-handed person to shoot themselves. Let's go back to the idea that this could have been a suicide. There's a few other things that lead me to believe this is still a possibility. I remember thinking it was very unlikely Nanette, as an animal lover, would let her pets die a slow and painful death, burning alive in the house. This isn't confirmed, but multiple reports I read have said that they got word that the pets had been shot before the fire started. Without getting into the weeds of my research on this topic, it's not uncommon for people to kill their pets before killing themselves. And it seems unlikely someone else would go through the trouble of doing all of this, especially for the cats. This would be pretty difficult. Cats get spooked easily, are quick, and are great at hiding. Another thing is that all of the deadbolts that were found in the rubble were in the locked position. Maybe the intruder had a key and locked the doors behind him. It's absolutely possible, but maybe Nanette was the only one inside of her locked up home when the house fire was set and she was shot. But what about all the threats Nanette was getting? She was in fear for her life and then was shot and burned in a house. Isn't this confirmation that her fears were justified? It might be, but it might not be. First, I want to look at if her fears were grounded in truth. I couldn't find any emails, texts, letters, video, or audio of Brian threatening Nanette. All we have is her word. Now, let's consider the mystery man. I remember reading about him and thinking it was so strange that someone was at their gate. Everything I watched or read mentioned, like I did earlier in this video, that the Crentels lived at the very end of a rural road, sparsely populated, implying that there was zero reason for anyone to be down there, unless they were going to the Crentels. But when I got there, I was surprised to see that there was a neighbor's driveway, just a few feet from the Crentels' gate. And looking at the photo, that's exactly where this man is, at the trash cans. Could he just be a neighbor or a friend of that neighbor? So was Nanette just paranoid? I think it's possible. Before I explain why I believe this, I want to say that I'm not talking down on Nanette in any way in saying this. This paranoia could have been a symptom of a mental illness or other stressors in Nanette's life, and I have compassion for someone in that situation. They need help. Anyways, Brian and this mystery man were not the only ones that Nanette was afraid of. She expressed fear of her stepson Justin as well, and wrote this message to her friend. The scary part is Justin is dangerous, has multiple guns.
Justin was or is kind of a rebel child who doesn't necessarily feel that he, needs to be held accountable for his actions.
Did he ever threaten her, the stepson?
No, not to my knowledge.
Justin was out of state during the incident and was able to be ruled out. And lastly, the day before the fire, Nanette was panicking about a propane guy coming to the house.
Like, for example, there was a propane man that had come out to the house on the 13th of July, and I found that out from Steve. She was afraid of this guy, and apparently even on that day had texted him or called him from home, freaking out because that guy was there and she didn't want to see him. And so she was asking him, how do I buzz him in without having to go down there? And he said, she already knew how to do that, but she was panicking, in such a panic that she forgot how. And so she called him to get the instructions. At any rate, she managed to get the gate open. He came and went with no consequence, or so he thought. But just the interesting timing of a propane delivery the day before was something that raised our interest. We were able to pass that on to one of the detectives, and they did actually talk to that guy. They don't believe the guy had anything to do with anything. I'm sure they checked his alibis and stuff like that.
Lastly, I just don't quite understand the coroner's reasonings. He said there was no soot or smoke found in Nanette's airways, so she could not have killed herself. But she was found in her bathroom, and it seems possible that she could have lit the fire, quickly turned around, walked into the bathroom, shut the door, and shot herself. A pathologist hired by the family was asked about this scenario, and this is how they replied.
Death is a process. If you have complete cardiac arrest, you will breathe for 5 or 6 minutes afterwards, because your brain has enough drive down in the brainstem to control the muscles that will breathe for you. They've done studies that demonstrate how if you do have complete cardiac arrest, a person will breathe, or a pig in this case in the studies, would breathe normally for a couple, 3 minutes, then have the erratic breathing, finally the last gasps, and then stop after about 5 or 6 minutes. In 5 or 6 minutes, copious soot smoke would have been there. You'd find evidence of inhalation, and there was none.
From my research, he is right that it's possible to keep breathing after being shot in the head, but it's far from a guarantee, and it's absolutely possible and common to completely stop breathing. I'm going to be honest, this section was incredibly uncomfortable to make. Nanette's family is confident that this was not a suicide. They knew Nanette well and say she would have never killed herself. And they might be right. She didn't give them any indication that she was going to kill herself. But this is pretty common as well. An article I read from Harvard said, quote, "A close friend of one of my colleagues committed suicide. It happened as so many suicides do, out of the blue. A few days earlier, my colleague had spent the day hanging out with her friend, who was relaxed, upbeat, and normal." Dr. Miller, an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, is quoted in the article saying, quote, "Many people never let on what they are feeling or planning. The paradox is that the people who are most intent on committing suicide know that they have to keep their plans to themselves if they are to carry out the act. Thus, the people most in need of help may be the toughest to save." I want to be very clear. I'm not saying I believe Nanette killed herself. I just believe it's still a possibility. I believe it's possible that her fears were blown out of proportion, that she was mentally unwell, and as a result of a mental break, she took her own life. Would she have done this with a clear mind? I don't believe so. There's still a villain in this version of the story, and it's not Nanette. It's a mental affliction. Nanette needed help. Based off the evidence, I don't believe this possibility can be ruled out. I also believe it's absolutely possible that her fears were rooted in truth, that she was level-headed and clear-minded, that she was desperately trying to warn those around her that she was in danger, but wasn't being taken seriously, that someone took Nanette's life and got away with it. The sad reality is we may never know which one is true. To any family that might be watching, I just want to say that I'm sorry for your loss. I cannot imagine what you've had to go through. And from the bottom of my heart, I hope you find answers. So, what do you think happened? I'm interested in hearing your opinion and seeing what conversations unfold in the comments. The Beyond Bardstown Lacombe podcast goes into even more detail than this video, and I'd highly recommend checking it out if you found this video interesting. Please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel, or watching another video. YouTube thinks that you'll like this one. See y'all next time.